The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness.
Let us pray. Thanks be to you, O God, for the reality of your good news in my life, the freedom to grow and learn and explore, to be myself in your sight, for the ways in which your love has bound up my wounds, through the tenderness of others, the gentle light of the sun, the restoring power of prayer, for clothing me in a garment of praise which lifts me from despair, challenges my assumptions about others, lifts me to joy on days of darkness, covers me with your presence, for urging me to share good news with my fellow travellers, even on the days when I feel unworthy of your call. Thanks be to you, O God. Amen.
Matthew 5, verses 38 to 48. You have heard it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the left cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, offer to them your coat too. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Love your enemy. You have heard it was said, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you too may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
I was once doing some work in a school where we were chatting with Year 6 about the causes of war. It was fascinating at the time and is still fascinating now to hear what our young people think, those for whom so very recently war has once again become a terrifying reality. I remember one girl said to me, Miss, I think there's always war where one group of people feels better than another group of people, feels they're superior. She said, it reminds me of me and my brother, because he thinks that he is the chosen one. And that leads to war in our house all the time, miss. It reminded me of God's chosen people, Israel, challenged in the teachings of Jesus to broaden their horizons, to grasp the truth that they are chosen not to remain stubbornly in their chosen cubbyhole, but to be scatterers of light for the whole world. They are challenged, aren't they, not to internalise the goodness and the grace of God, but to be bearers of God's blessing, that all may come to know that same grace. Well, here in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus offers them a different way. A way of living together which will bring about peace and harmony. But it is very far from an easy option. Jesus draws on the teaching of the Old Testament, in which there is a sort of a justice sketched out which would stand squarely in the way of revenge running away with itself. The notion of an eye for an eye. It's not given to encourage retaliation, but rather to limit escalating counterattacks. So if someone comes and steals one of your sheep, you may only take one sheep back rather than half a dozen. It seems only fair, right? But Jesus is not content to leave it there. And he gives them a vision of a new way in which even more is demanded of those who are chosen. Here is extravagant grace in action, like I imagine nothing they had ever heard before. The examples that Jesus uses to press home his point speak of the context of his day, and they are cutting. He talks about the humiliation of being slapped, the vulnerability of relinquishing probably the only 2 garments you might be wearing. And in a society where the law allowed soldiers to force civilians to carry their equipment only 1 mile, Jesus encourages them to reflect the generosity of God by going further, and in doing so, amazing the aggressor. It's not an easy path which he sketches out. It's not a passive way. It's not something which advocates just receiving the aggression that comes to you. It is an active and a purposeful and a really difficult way of bringing about peace. The astonishing thing, of course, about his teaching is that Jesus is not speaking in the abstract. He's sketching out his own journey, his own life, in calling each one of us to embark upon a different and creative way, a difficult way of establishing harmony. He shows us the solidarity of his own journey. He reminds us that whenever we choose the hard way of working for peace, of striving for peace, the non-passive way of striving for peace, then, he says, we reflect something of the glory of God to the world around us and to those who are perhaps our enemy. That's true for the leaders of our nations for whom we continue to pray. It is true for local community leaders, and it's true for every single one of us in our daily living. Where, I wonder, today is God calling you, calling me to do the difficult work of peace and reconciliation. Chosenness, in Jesus' view, does not confer permission to sit back and relax in our good fortune. Instead, it places upon us a responsibility to lift up, to encourage, to hold out God's extravagant love to everyone. Or, as one young lad said to me earlier this very week, "Miss, I think that peace really starts with me." Amen.
Blessed are they, the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are they, full of sorrow, they shall be consoled. Rejoice and be glad. Blessed are you, holy are you. Rejoice and be glad. Yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are they, the lowly ones, they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst, they shall have their fill. Rejoice and be glad. Blessed are you, holy are you. Rejoice and be glad. Yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are they who show mercy, mercy shall be theirs. Blessed are they, the pure of heart, they shall see God. Rejoice and be glad. Blessed are you, holy are you. Rejoice and be glad. Yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are they who seek peace, they are the children of God. Blessed are they who suffer in faith, the glory of God is theirs. Rejoice and be glad. Blessed are you, holy are you. Rejoice and be glad. Yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who suffer hate, all because of me. Rejoice and be glad. Yours is the kingdom. Shine for all to see. Rejoice and be glad. Blessed are you, holy are you. Rejoice and be glad. Yours is the kingdom of God.
Today, on Remembrance Sunday, we call to mind with thanksgiving those whose lives have been lost in wars past and present. And so I thought, as we go to a time of prayer, I would share with you just a little bit of the story of my great-great-uncle. Private James Burrows, MM, was born in 1892. He left school when he was 14 and he became a labourer in a coach-making factory. And then in 1914, at the beginning of the First War, he enlisted. Originally in Manchester, but he was then transferred to the King's Liverpool Regiment. He had little idea of the horrors that were to come. They were told that they would be well paid, which I imagine was an incentive. They were so poor. And of course it was said that the war would be over by Christmas. He had to do some preliminary training, and then he went to Dover by train, then by boat to northern France, and then he marched to the first camp. So he would have been at the front by early 1915. The battalion moved around during the following months, fighting the battles and skirmishes, winning some, losing others, and every day there were casualties and fatalities. On August the 16th, 1916, the battle was raging near Delville Wood, just outside the village of Guillemont, when he was one of the fatalities that day. His body was never found, and so he has no actual grave. But he is commemorated on the memorial at Thiepval. He was awarded the military medal for bravery in the field, and that medal eventually made its way home to his parents. The citation which accompanied the medal is lost, and all the copies of the First World War citations, having been kept in London in some building somewhere, which were bombed in the Second World War, were lost too. So we don't know what the citation actually was. However, Jack was mentioned in the London Gazette on the 14th of November 1916 as having been awarded the military medal by His Majesty the King for bravery in the field. He was one of many ordinary people living often difficult lives, drawn into a war which would ultimately take them from those who loved them. Today, we remember their stories and we hold them in a moment of quiet before God.
Let us remember before the God of creativity and life those who have been lost in conflicts across many years, those who live with catastrophic injuries to body, mind and spirit. Let us call to mind their stories and the horrors they faced. Let us pray for those involved in conflict in the present day, remembering people at war in every place, those who long for them, and all who today know no peace. Let us pray for governments around the world, for those whose lives are committed to the peaceful transformation of our world. Living God, we remember before you those who have been lost in the storm of war and who now rest in the peace of your presence. Help us to honour their memory by living as people of peace and to work for reconciliation in our nations, our communities, our families, and our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We pray for the coming of God's kingdom. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen. May the sending one fill us with joy to proclaim good news. May the healing one fill us with tenderness to live compassionately. May the strengthening one gift us with courage to love boldly. Amen.